Clint Eastwood had always believed in the power of education. He had spent years learning from the greatest directors, actors, and writers, constantly improving his craft. But today, Clint wasn't at a movie set or a lecture on filmmaking. He was sitting in a college lecture hall. It was a place he rarely visited, but this time he had come to hear a lecture on mathematics, a subject that had fascinated him for years. Clint wasn't there for a film class, and he wasn't there because he had to be. He had simply always found numbers and patterns interesting. Clint had kept this interest hidden for most of his career, but now, in his later years, he had time to pursue a few of the things he had always enjoyed learning. As he took his seat, he noticed the professor, a man in his mid-40s with a sharp, almost condescending attitude. The professor, who had already started speaking to the class, noticed Clint and hesitated for a second. "Well," the professor said, with a slight smirk, "it seems like we have an unexpected visitor in the class today. A celebrity, no less. Clint Eastwood, I presume. I'm sure you're used to dealing with scripts and acting, but I wonder if you've ever really worked with numbers before." The professor's tone was light, but there was a clear underlying challenge in his words, as if he were trying to test Clint, maybe even mock him. The class chuckled slightly, and Clint, ever the professional, simply nodded, unfazed by the professor's remarks. "You'd be surprised," Clint replied calmly, not wanting to make a scene but also not willing to let the comment slide. "I've been known to solve a few equations myself." The professor, clearly not impressed, continued with the lecture, but Clint's response had planted a seed of curiosity in him. Little did the professor know, Clint had a deep understanding of mathematics, one that went far beyond the surface. As the lecture continued, Clint remained quietly in the back of the room, taking in the information. The professor was lecturing about advanced calculus, a topic Clint had studied in depth years ago but hadn't had the opportunity to apply since. The professor, sensing that the class had become a little too comfortable, decided to stir things up a bit. "Let's see how well you all understand today's lesson," the professor announced. "I'm going to put a problem on the board, and I want everyone to try solving it. Let's see if anyone can get the answer before the end of class. And if someone like Clint Eastwood here," he added with a grin, "can solve it, I'll consider it an impressive feat." With that, the professor wrote a challenging calculus problem on the board. It was complicated, involving multiple steps and abstract concepts. The students around Clint began to murmur as they tried to make sense of the problem, and the professor stood back, watching them with a smug expression. Clint, however, didn't hesitate. He quickly scanned the problem, the familiar patterns of numbers and symbols coming back to him. He took out a pen and began to jot down the steps, his mind working through the equation with precision. The students around him glanced at him, some unsure whether they should continue with their own work or watch the celebrity struggle. Clint didn't care about the eyes on him. He focused solely on the problem. Within minutes, Clint had solved the equation, his hand moving confidently across the paper. He sat back, quietly awaiting the professor's response while the other students continued to wrestle with the problem. Clint sat quietly, his solution to the problem in front of him. The professor, noticing that the rest of the class was still struggling with the complex equation, turned back to the board. He was about to say something when his eyes landed on Clint's paper. For a moment, his confident smirk faltered. Clint had already solved the equation, and not just solved it, but done so with ease and precision. The professor took a step closer to Clint, trying to mask his surprise. "Mr. Eastwood," he said, his tone now more cautious, "I see you've managed to solve the problem." Clint looked up, his expression calm. "Yes, I did," he said simply. The professor cleared his throat, now unsure of how to proceed. "Well, I have to admit I wasn't expecting that," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "You seem to have a deeper understanding of mathematics than I originally thought." Clint's smile remained subtle. "Mathematics is something I've always found fascinating," he said, keeping his tone humble. "It's a different kind of challenge, but in many ways it's no different than acting. You break it down piece by piece and you find your way through." The students in the room were now staring at Clint, their eyes wide with surprise. The professor, now completely humbled, took a deep breath. "I stand corrected," he said, with a small, respectful nod. "It seems you've not only earned your place here but also my respect. I apologize for the earlier comments. I'll make sure to give you the respect you deserve from now on." Clint nodded, giving the professor a kind smile. "There's no need to apologize," Clint replied. "We all have something to learn from each other, but sometimes it's good to remember not to judge a book by its cover." The professor, a little humbled, smiled back. "Lesson learned, Mr. Eastwood. Lesson learned." The room was still quiet, the students now looking at Clint with a new sense of respect. The professor, who had initially set out to mock Clint, now realized that he had underestimated him, not just as a celebrity, but as a person who had depth and knowledge beyond the world of film. Clint's calm demeanor, combined with his unexpected brilliance in mathematics, had completely changed the atmosphere in the lecture hall. The professor cleared his throat, still trying to regain his professional composure. "All right, class. It seems we've had a rather unexpected but enlightening turn of events," he said, trying to shift the focus back to the lesson. "Let's take a moment to appreciate the power of persistence and how, sometimes, people can surprise us. Mr. Eastwood's ability to solve this problem shows that success is more than just fame or skill in one area. It's about the willingness to learn and apply yourself in many different ways." The class, still in a slight state of shock, nodded in agreement, the mood lighter now that the tension had dissipated. Clint, for his part, remained quiet, letting the professor finish his comments. As the class continued, the students seemed to have a different outlook on the subject. They were more engaged, more thoughtful in their approach to the problems in front of them. Clint, though still quiet, could sense the shift. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about showing that knowledge and respect could transcend the barriers that people often put up based on appearances. At the end of the class, as the students began to pack up, the professor approached Clint. "Mr. Eastwood, if you'd like to come back sometime for a more in-depth discussion on mathematics, I'd be more than happy to have you," he said, his tone now respectful and sincere. Clint smiled, his voice kind. "Thank you, but I think I've got enough from today. Just remember that sometimes learning doesn't have to be in a classroom. It can happen anywhere." The professor smiled, a new respect in his eyes. "You're right, Clint. I'll remember that." The next few weeks in the lecture hall were noticeably different. The students, now inspired by Clint's unexpected display of knowledge, became more engaged in their lessons. The professor, having learned an important lesson in humility, started to encourage more open discussions, fostering an environment where students felt comfortable questioning their assumptions and exploring new ideas. Clint's brief visit had changed the dynamic of the classroom, proving that sometimes the most profound lessons came from the most unexpected sources. Word about Clint's surprise visit to the math class spread quickly around the campus. Students, initially shocked by the fact that Clint Eastwood, of all people, had taken time to attend a math class, now saw him in a new light. He wasn't just an icon in the film industry. He was someone who valued knowledge and believed in the importance of intellectual growth. Some students, inspired by his quiet humility, even began to explore areas of study they hadn't considered before. Clint's message of persistence and the importance of never judging someone based on surface appearances resonated with many of them, encouraging a shift in the way they viewed not only their studies, but the people around them. Even the professor had changed. He had become more open-minded, more patient, and more willing to encourage diverse perspectives in his lectures. One day he took a moment to address the class. "We all come from different walks of life, and we often make assumptions based on who we think people are. But sometimes, those assumptions are completely wrong. Mr. Eastwood's visit taught me that the real value in any subject, whether it's math or life itself, is the willingness to learn and the humility to respect others, no matter where they come from." As the semester progressed, Clint's brief visit to the class continued to have a lasting impact on both the students and the professor. The professor, once dismissive of the potential for learning beyond traditional frameworks, had come to value the quiet wisdom that people from all walks of life could bring to the table. He now encouraged his students to look beyond stereotypes, urging them to approach every situation with an open mind and heart, ready to learn from anyone, no matter their background. The students, in turn, grew more confident in their ability to think critically and independently. They knew that knowledge wasn't confined to textbooks or lectures. It could be found anywhere. Some students even began to approach their studies differently, realizing that the lessons they learned were not just about solving equations, but about applying those lessons to life itself. They started to ask bigger questions, challenging themselves to think deeper and engage with the world around them in more meaningful ways. Clint's unexpected appearance in the math class had reminded everyone that knowledge wasn't just for the elite or the expected. It was for everyone who was willing to seek it out, to learn, and to grow. One day, months later, the professor wrote Clint a letter. He thanked him for the lesson he had imparted, the lesson that went far beyond mathematics. It was a lesson about humility, curiosity, and the importance of respecting others, regardless of who they were. The professor had framed that letter, and it now hung on the wall of his office as a reminder of how one moment, one small gesture, could change everything. And as for Clint, he went back to his quiet life, continuing his work in the film industry and his private studies. But he knew deep down that sometimes the most important things in life happened not on the silver screen, but in the classrooms, the hallways, and the everyday interactions we have with each other. It wasn't about being famous. It was about being real, being humble, and never underestimating the power of learning. Please subscribe to the channel for Clint Eastwood Respect. Thanks.